In just a moment, we're going to read a passage from Genesis 11, and I want to just give you some quick background or contextual information, and it could go on a long, long time, but I'm not going to do that. Genesis 11 is at the end of a section of Genesis chapters 1 through 11, which are called the primeval history. They're sort of like the not only the sort of the prehistory or the introduction or the prologue to Genesis, but to the entire canon of Scripture. And so you move in Genesis 1 through 11 from creation to the Babel story in 11. And it gives way then to what becomes sort of the bedrock story of what people culturally called the Judeo-Christian tradition, and that is God's covenant with Abraham in the 12th chapter, Genesis 12, that I'm going to make a people of you. And that's where the phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's born and starts in the 12th chapter. And the 11th chapter is at the conclusion of that sort of primeval or that prehistory. One of the overriding themes to address the question here biblically, and by the way, this is true not just amongst Christians and Jews. It is a true thing is there are stories that are used to explain why things are the way they are. And sometimes those stories are rooted in history. Sometimes those stories are rooted in legend and mythology. But when I was a child, very young, it's the rainbows in the sky. And so, well, what's a rainbow? And so then somebody may tell the Noah story, or you'll hear about the pot of gold. And so stories, so you understand what I'm saying here? We tell stories to explain the way things are. And it's, how many of you read Edith Hamilton's classic literature book called Mythology? If you've taken a course in any liberal arts, in world literature, or philosophy even, Edith Hamilton's book, Mythology, is excellent. And all it is a compilation of these great stories. Beowulf is one of these stories. Genesis 11 is one of those stories that we use to explain things the way they are. And it addresses the question. You can't read the newspaper, in my opinion, today and see the plight of where we are in this world and not think of Genesis 3. You just can't do it. The fall. Why are things the way they are? And Genesis 3 comes to mind. Well, Babel is... why are things the way they are? We get creation story, we get the fall story, we get the Cain and Abel story in that sort of primeval history. We get the Noah story. And now at the sort of the fulfillment of that initial human history, we get humanity at its fullest. And a way of putting that is too big for their britches. At the climax of human sort of destiny, we're there, and we come to Genesis 11. I'm going to read it. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that they were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now this series is called Bible Stories Rated AC, Adult Content. In our sexually energized world, AC almost always means bad language or sexual content. That's not the significance of it in the vast majority of this series. It has to do with stories that are just difficult to grapple with and perhaps to apply and make sense of. And I think the Babel story qualifies as one of those. So we read Genesis 11 verses 1 through 9, and we discover in the midst of that it's not only Babel, B-A-B-E-L, translated into English, but it's been B-A-B-B-L-E ever since, in very many respects. So it's been Babel ever since. So let's take a look at the story. I've kind of broken the story down into three movements of thought. And the first one is verses 1 through 4. Prior to this particular story taking place, there seems to be a given that's operative here in this story, and that is that while there were multiple people groups already present in the world, we had the assumption one common language. That's the thread that runs through sort of the preface to this story. Multiple people groups, but one common language. That's just sort of thrown onto the table as a given. Then we move into the story. People grew. So we're told here in this story, it's certainly one of the implied lines, that the people grew. That the story operates under the assumption that people growing is happening. But the way they grow is something that's one of those human, evidently, universals. And this is why this story has, amongst others in that section, but it's one of the reasons why this story has one of those sort of universals. Why are things this way? Many years ago, I probably ought not to tell this story, but I always do that. Because my wife will say, you shouldn't have told that story. But my son, of my three children, it was my number two son, my number two child. And I don't know, it was bedtime. I don't remember exactly the context, but he was pretty young. He may have been 12, something like that. And we're going to bed, and I said, what's on your mind? And he was talking, and he said, we started talking about purpose in life. And I said, well, you know, what's your purpose? He said, Daddy, I want to be famous. And I said, well, that's a good thing, but usually fame is not a goal. That fame is not the end, that fame comes of having some other worthy goal, and you flow from that. And fame in and of itself is sort of a nasty thing. And as we were to go off into this phase of life, he said, no, I want to be famous. And I said,